Today, the name Walt Disney suggests not just the man, but a whole area of popular culture, taking in film, television, theme parks, comics, toys, and books. A global franchise that started with a mouse.
He had this drive to accomplish this tremendous thing. He was going to make it better and better. He's the most inventive, creative guy I've ever known.
He gave us all the technique, all the methods, all the tried and tested. You just take the best of it and then try and do fly.
Get out of here, get me some money too.
Animation can be, well, Walt said himself, anything that man can imagine, he can animate.
Disney cartoons had personalities, had characters that you could relate to, that you loved, that were appealing, and that you cared about.
Look at him.
Walt Disney represented the classic American success story. The boy from the Midwest who achieved mythic status. He was born in Chicago in 1901 of Irish and Scottish ancestry. One of a family of 5 children, he spent his early years on a farm in Missouri, a period he would treasure as his ideal memory. Later, he moved to Kansas City, where his father Elias ran a newspaper distribution business. Young Walt, an enthusiastic, if not especially talented artist, wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. Instead, he found work in Kansas City as a commercial artist. And in 1920, at age 19, he began making cartoon shorts. These laughograms included fairy tales, advertisements, and public service films. The films were a commercial failure. So in 1923, Walt headed for Los Angeles. After trying unsuccessfully to find work as a live-action director, he began producing cartoons with his brother Roy, who looked after the financial side, and Ubi Eyeworks, an artist colleague from Kansas City who took over the actual drawings for their films. They made the Alice series. Many cartoons of this time placed animated figures against a live background. Disney instead placed his live leading lady in a cartoon world. They also made 26 shorts featuring Oswald the Rabbit. When the Disney studio lost the rights to Oswald, they had to come up with a new character. The rabbit turned into a mouse, and one of the most famous figures in cinema history was born. In 1929, Mickey Mouse made his first appearance in Steamboat Willie. It was the first sound cartoon, and Mickey was an instant success. Although Walt provided Mickey with his voice, the cartoons were drawn by Ubi Eyeworks.
You think of him, oh yeah, Mr. Disney drew all that. Mr. Disney didn't draw, he didn't draw anything there. And it's been many years since he had. And things I've seen of his, he never drew very well, and he was an untrained artist. But he had the good judgment to know that he needed to hire highly trained artists.
In the early 30s, his obsession with improving the quality of animated films coincided with the American Depression. Desperate economic conditions meant he could hire and train the very best young artists, many of them fresh from art school.
I'd been going there about 2.5 years to school, and somebody brought in an ad that Walt Disney was running in the various pulp magazines. And showed it to me, and I still have the ad itself. And I looked at it and it said, there it is right there. Walt Disney wants artists. Walt Disney, creator of Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphonies, offers exceptional opportunities to trained male artists. I love that part. I had no idea what the animation studio, we call them cartoon studios. The only thing I knew was that when I saw Mickey Mouse cartoon at the theater, I laughed. I laughed really hard in the days when people laughed.
Music and songs were always central to the appeal of Disney films, and as well as the Mickey Mouse shorts, he established a series of music-based films, the Silly Symphonies, which didn't feature regular characters, but enabled his animators to experiment and develop their art. These films included Flowers and Trees, the first cartoon in color. The originality of the Silly Symphonies caught the eye of young artists like Ward Kimball.
The thing that really opened my eyes was Father Noah's Ark. I can remember that day because I was so impressed. When the storm started and the lightning and it began to rain and all the animals went running toward the ark, I remember you were padding along and the slower animals would recede slightly. The fast, zippy things would pass the rest of them. And the elephants lumbered and the giraffe loped along in their long-legged style. This impressed me. This just wasn't just movement for movement's sake. There was an attempt here to caricature or to capture the movement of the real animal, even though we were sitting there laughing.
In 1932, Disney started regular art classes at the studio to improve his artist skills, a policy which further distinguished him from his rivals. By 1934, this had become a full-time art school with 150 students studying animation, character drawing, and animal movement.
The first thing I did when I got a little money to experiment, I put all my artists back in school. The art schools that existed then didn't quite have enough for what we needed. So we set up our own art school.
Well, you were inventing a new art anyway.
Well, yes, but we were just going a little bit beyond what they were getting in the art school, where they work with the static figure. Now, we were dealing in motion, movement, and the flow of movement, the flow of things, you know, action, reaction, all of that. So we had to set up our own school. And out of that school have come the artists that now make up my staff here, and more than that, the artists that make up most all of the cartoon outfits in Hollywood.
The results of this are very evident in a film like Bambi, where the animators had to bring the animal characters to life while depicting their movement and features with a high degree of realism.
These things have to move like real animals. You have to believe in them. And of course, this was Walt's philosophy anyway, that whatever we did, you had to bring this to life. And if it came to life, the chances were it was something that he would like. The Bambi story had a message that he was interested in, which was man was giving animals, and still is, a very bad time, but that was a message that apparently he felt strongly about.
Bambi, quick, The thicket! Faster! Faster, Bambi! Don't look back! Keep running! Keep running!
We made it! We made it, Mother! Mother!
When I saw Bambi first, I was 7 years old, and I was crazy about it. I just bowled over it. And, of course, until I was about 15, whenever I could see it again, I was knocked out. And then when I was 22, I started my first animated film here, and I finished it when I was 25. And I happened to see Bambi right towards the end of it. And I thought, what a lot of sugary, sentimental mush. And, the young intellectual's reaction. And then I became kind of conscious of my shortcomings as an animator right at the end of the film. I started to catch on. I didn't know too much. And about 3 years after that, I saw Bambi again. I came out on my hands and knees. I actually came out on my knees. I couldn't believe it. How did they do that? I mean, how did they animate those creatures with dignity? Four-legged creatures appearing as with human emotions. I mean, extraordinary.
Your mother can't be with you anymore.
Here you had Bambi from his birth to becoming an adult. So how do you face a thing like that? I did a lot of experimenting. I experimented, this is a bunch of experiments with Bambi's head. And what I attempted to do here was going through child behavior books. These were all expressions interpreted into this little deer's head that were on human babies. There's something about a baby in proportion that the upper size of the head, forehead is big. If you take a deer, even a very young one, will be pretty much this sort of thing. Now, what we wanted to do was to bring in some of these elements that say youth and young into this little animal. But here you have this high forehead and this very, very small lower face. So here you are. Basically, this is Bambi.
Now, the one thing that Walt always did have was the believability. He communicated with people. He reached people. There were other ways of going which many animators preferred. That is to say that the idea of what an animator can do it's fantasy. He does not have to be bound to the ground. He's not like a real character. So that if you could have an idea of getting the character to explode and become 12 characters running around, as we did with Donald Duck sometimes. Donald Duck, we froze him, we burnt him, we chewed him up, we sawed him in half. You did everything. You can't destroy him. You don't make your character believable. You don't have him do all these things that are so subtle and so difficult to do. You don't want him alive, because you want to be able to pound him and flatten him and squash him, have him fall 2,000 feet.
With the film running at 24 frames a second, and every frame needing an individual new drawing, even a 5-minute cartoon would need at least 7,000 drawings. A feature-length film such as Bambi required around 2.5 million individual drawings. Walt explains the process.
Here, a Mickey Mouse short is being put on film. Mickey has been inked and painted on transparent sheets of celluloid. This happens to be a panorama effect where the character will walk in one place and the background keeps moving behind him to create the illusion. Each time a new cell of Mickey is photographed, the background must be moved a fraction of an inch. Photographing each one of these celluloids of Mickey and background makes a single frame of motion picture film. And here's how the action looks on the screen. Now note that our character is capable of giving us a real feeling of 3 dimensions.
Walt basically was a realist. He wanted 3 dimensions in the characters, and he wanted therefore 3 dimensions in the background. And with that wish, that forced the acquiring of knowledge on perspective, where things can be made to seem to go back into a picture. And what we found, however, was that having learned perspective and how to create depth in a picture, the next thing was to learn how to break the rules so that you could enhance the scene. And in this case here, which is from Cloth Cleaners, I had a character staggering along the edge of a ledge here. He had been hit in the head and was dizzy, and I wanted the audience to feel he was high up and in a state of vertigo and danger. Now, so I took the ledge that he had to come down. Now, if I produce these lines to a point, they'll vanish here. And that, therefore, is where the horizon should be, because all horizontal planes vanish on the horizon. But for the sake of this scene, which is a vertical pan, and the camera took in only a certain amount, I deliberately dropped the landscape down here. That was in order to make it seem more dangerous and give him a feeling of being exposed to space and air here. And as we brought the camera down, we then came to the tops of the buildings. And you felt, my God, that's terribly high. I did vanish the buildings to that same point, so that I had consistency. But this was a case of deliberately breaking the rules in order to enhance the scene.
Walt Disney always realized the commercial importance of technological progress. He made the first cartoons with sound and in color. This was also linked with a desire to increase the realism in his films. This culminated in the mid-30s and the development of the multiplane camera, which gave the animation the illusion of depth.
It also came out of our school of self-improvement here at the studio. It is a blueprint of a piece of equipment designed to make cartoons more realistic and enjoyable. This is the plan for a super cartoon camera. We call it the multiplane camera. Now, when you walk along a country road toward the moon, it certainly doesn't grow larger like this, nor does it shrink in size when you walk away from it. The problem was how to take a painting and make it behave like a real piece of scenery under the camera. The trouble was we were photographing a flat two-dimensional background. So we set about making plans and blueprints for a new cartoon camera that would overcome this. The scene were separated according to their varying distances from the viewer. This put the moon on a plane farthest away from the camera. With our original picture broken down in this manner, it is possible to control the relative speed with which each individual part of it moves to or away from the camera. But the moon remains absolutely still, and so it will always remain the same, neither growing nor shrinking in size. Of course, our cartoon camera does not shoot sideways, but is placed above and shoots downward toward the drawing. Since this new camera used many planes, we called it the multiplane camera. And here now is our same moonlight scene, the way the multiplane camera sees it. As you can see, we finally got the moon to keep its proper distance.
The full potential of the multiplane camera was first shown in the 1937 short, The Old Mill. An element of the film that required a different kind of invention was the sound effects.
So I use this old wallet, and I've kept it all these years. Gee whiz, that was in 1937. Here it is, 88, and it still creaks. You know, you need an empty wallet, and I had no trouble with that. I had lots of these, but they'd walk like this.
Walt's sense of humor was situation, why people get into certain things, the way all comedians think. Buster Keaton could sit down and analyze how to set the scene up so it's funny. Chaplin could do it. and Laurel and Hardy. And Walt was good at that. And he could sense when a scene wasn't playing right. He'd say, well, the trouble is here, you bring the girl in too soon, it spoils the joke. He was a genius at that. That was his sense of humor. It always dealt with the product we were doing. Anything else was extraneous.
Walt had found that the real way to get entertainment was through the personalities. And if you had a gag, why, it should be based on what type of personality was involved with it.
Disney avoided Hollywood social life, dividing his time between his marriage, which lasted 40 years, his children, and playing polo. The studio's creative development consumed his energy. His brother Roy was an invaluable partner supervising the business side of the operation. As with everyone who worked with Walt, Roy's contribution remained largely anonymous. What began as the Disney Brothers Studio in 1924 became only 2 years later the Walt Disney Studio. Roy's son, Roy Disney Jr., is now vice chairman of the company.
There's no question that that partnership was unique, and I have always thought that Walt would have been considered the mad genius who made a fortune and went broke 21 times in his life, had it not been for the stabilizing influence that my dad contributed financially. I've spent a lot of my life trying to explain to people that without my dad, probably it would have been quite a different world. And I wish he had gotten more credit through the years.
Actually, what Walt was trying to accomplish didn't include eulogizing anybody. Nobody else was to be important in their own name. They were important to him. We were important to Disney. But we didn't get credit. We weren't supposed to get credit. In fact, Walt got me to one side and he said, hey, Ken, if you got any ideas of making the name Ken Anderson famous, he says, you better get out right now. But he says, if you want to do this work with me and stay here and push what I'm doing, he says, Walt Disney is the name, you're my man.
Well, that's the nature of the business we're in, of course. You know, someone has to be the producer, and that, if that relationship's working right, the producer's vision is the overriding vision. And it feeds off of all the other people and their ideas and their contributions, but it has to always subjugate itself to the one end product that's really one man's vision.
When Walt would call a meeting, it was mandatory that everybody understood what Walt meant. Oh, they always had a secretary who took all the notes. She was obliged to do them verbatim, particularly Walt. And when these meetings were over with, carbons were made for each one of these people. And of course, the reason was that nobody was to misunderstand Walt, because what he said had to be done. And then some of us who took these meetings were particularly overworked because we did other little things, like we would watch whenever Walt would pull out his Chesterfield cigarette. Someone would get very close and light it for him in a hurry, but that meant he wasn't too interested. And we'd wait, and he had a chronic cough, but he always seemed to have that chronic cough when he was bored, particularly if something bothered him in the picture. So that was recorded on the notes. And then it was always great when we'd have these meetings. Walt liked to wear cashmere sweaters. He liked to be casual, never any tie, always use loafers. So when you went to these meetings, everybody were in their cashmere sweaters and their loafers, and they all smoked Chesterfields at the meeting.
It was here that Walt's extraordinary abilities as both actor and storyteller really flowered.
This man could tell a story so well, and if you had the problem of having to animate this, you're thinking, my God, can I in any way animate this as well as I have seen him do it? And he could pantomime these things. And he could he could do every one of these characters. And you believed him.
If it's a certain type of personality, you hunt for people that have that personality. Or you look at old movies and hunt for someone who has a way of doing it. Or best of all, you look to Walt Disney, because he could be anybody. He could act out any part. And you'd say to Walt, well, I don't know that this guy I don't see too much in his just being sort of sulky like this. And he'd say, oh, hell, he wouldn't be that. The first thing you know, he's emoting all over the place and good. He's not having it up. He's really good, but you can see that he feels the character. He knows what this character should be doing in this spot in the picture.
Walt came to the story meeting there in which Mickey was on a promontory and with little waves coming up and dashing against the shore. But he looked at it and thought, with Mickey conducting out there, that it was rather skimpy, that why not conduct the universe? Which, of course, everybody thought, how stupid can you get? I mean, this is perfect, from that point on, I'd say that was a good example of his approach to things. I mean, was to amplify it to a point where everybody agreed that that was the way it should be and will be.
By the mid-30s, the Disney studio reigned supreme in the animation field. Since 1928, the staff had expanded from 6 to nearly 200. Disney's cartoon shorts were hugely popular, but Walt's obsession with perfection made these films very uneconomical. In addition, he found the short film format frustrating. This was to change in 1934, when the studio began work on a project which would alter the history of animation.
The apple in the brew, let the sleeping death see through. Look on the skin, the symbol of what lies within. Now turn red to tempt Snow White to make her hunger for a bite.
We didn't have any idea that we were going to make a feature. Those of us who were working there, I don't think, there may have been some that did, but I don't know who they would be. And Walt gave us 50 cents each in the afternoon, and he said, hey, why don't you go get yourself a dinner and come back and be back here at 8 o'clock. Be back on the soundstage. So we went and had this wonderful dinner. You could have a wonderful dinner for 35 cents. And came back to the confines of the studio, and we walked in, still not knowing what it was all about. We walked into this sound stage, was all dark so we could save money. Just the light on the floor right in front of the seats. And then behind us, as the tiers of these seats rose up, there were this projection booth. So about 40 of us sat there, and we got all settled, and Walt was talking to the guys in the front. He came down the front of this thing, and he said, I'm going to tell you a story. He said, it's been with me all my life. He said, I've lived it. He started in and told the story of Snow White better than we put it on the screen. He spent from 8 o'clock to 11:30, and he portrayed all the parts. He had to go forward and back and forward and back. The cutting didn't matter in order to tell it all, to get it all in. But he became even the queen, he became the huntsman, he became the dwarves, he became Snow White. And the guy changed. He sat right in front of our eyes. And here's Walt Disney changing down there. He's an enormous talent as an actor. He could really sell things. And he sold this story to us in such a way that we couldn't believe our ears.
There must be something your little heart desires. Perhaps there's someone you love.
Well, there is someone.
I thought so.
Snow White was partly inspired by an early film of a story Walt had seen as a boy.
Now take the apple, dearie, and make a wish.
I wish.
That's it, go on.
Hi-ho, 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 if home from earth we go. Hi-ho, 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 if home from earth we go.
This pompous-looking individual is Doc, the self-appointed leader of the group. And this little fellow is bashful. He's secretly in love with Snow White. And this funny face is Sneezy. He has hay fever. And old droopy eyes is called Sleepy. And Happy here with the beaming smile. And old Sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater. And last but not least is Dopey. He's nice, but sort of silly.
Hi-ho, hi-ho.
Snow White was a massive hit at the box office, and Walt's shrewdness in using timeless fairy tale material has allowed his animated features to be regularly re-released for new audiences. Snow White has become one of the highest-grossing films of all time. However, its success gave Walt a new problem: how to top it. Disney now turned to the story of a wooden puppet which came to life.
I was home in bed with the chicken pox. This was, I believe, probably 1938, maybe 39. So I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was upstairs in bed sick. It was a Sunday, and Walt and Lily came over to have dinner with my mother and dad, and they came up and said hello to me, and Lily went back downstairs, and Walt kind of cocked his eyebrow and stayed. And he said, listen, we're working on a story I want to tell you. And he sat down on the edge of the bed, and he must have been there half an hour, and he told me Pinocchio from end to end. And with all the gestures and wonderful, he had a way of absolutely hypnotizing you when he told the story. And I sat there absolutely enthralled, and I couldn't wait for that movie to come out.
One night a long time... Pardon me. Wait till I fix this thing here. There. One night, a long time ago, my travels took me to a quaint little village.
What he did with me that night, and what he always did with everyone when he was working on a story, he was testing it. He'd tell you the story, and then if he saw there was a place that wasn't quite working, the next time he told it, he'd have changed it a little bit. And stories evolved with him that way.
Pinocchio was based on a 19th century Italian children's book by Carlo Collodi. The original was an episodic and cruelly violent story which was unfilmable as it stood. Disney's adaptation was based upon seeing the potential in the book's characters.
You don't want people to say, "Oh, isn't he cute?" No, that's not the idea of appeal. It's the fact that they're drawn to it. They're fascinated by them. And they might be saying, "Hey, it reminds you of Uncle Joe's little boy, you know, or the way you were when you were a kid, or I remember doing something like that." They're drawn into it. The more appealing the character is, the more it helps their own self-image as they're into it. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be pretty. It doesn't mean they have to be handsome. They can be a freckle-faced, little scrawny kid. But if he's animated with appeal, then you're going to like to look at him.
Yes, Pinocchio.
While we were doing the dialogue, they would take a camera and they focused in just on our nose, our mouth, and our chin. So that every frame that your mouth would move, they could transmit that to the animation.
I've given you life.
Why?
Because tonight, Geppetto wished for a real boy.
Am I a real boy?
The whole story evolves around the fact that Pinocchio wanted to be a real boy, and he finally turns into be a real boy, so they wanted a real boy's voice. And at that time, I was a real boy. A real boy, and I was only, 10 and a half, something like that. Because when we finished, I was 12. So I just used my natural voice, and Walt Disney said that's the quality he wanted.
Go on. Say something.
Gee, you're funny. Do it again.
You do talk.
Yes, the blue fairy came.
The blue fairy?
Uh-huh. And I got a conscience.
A conscience.
And someday, I'm gonna be a real boy.
A real boy. It's my wish.
Animator usually listens with his eyes closed while the man's recording.
Can talk.
And the director's watching the guy, and the sound man's watching him. Everybody's watching him, but the animator's off here going... He's trying to see pictures. He's trying to see attitudes. He's trying to see how the guy will act to this voice.
Shh. How's on? No, stupid. Don't be crude.
Your villain has to have something in the design that attracts you.
Saying to the Duchess only yesterday. Oh, how...
If you draw a real ugly character, everybody pulls back from it. There's no fascination there. Nobody wants to really look at ugliness. You might be drawn to it, but you always close one eye and hope you're not going to have to really see what's going on there.
How would you blokes like to make some real money?
I'd start with the eyes, The eyes are kind of a key to the emotions that the person has. The audience always looks at the eyes of any character, whether it was a fox or a person. Anyway, this is kind of a normal expression for him, very shifty. He never looks at anybody head on. Always scheming.
Now, coachman, what's your proposition?
The fox handled his cigar in what he thought was an elegant style. Actually, it wasn't. It was kind of stupid, But he always he handled it as if it was a jewel, So, I spent about a week drawing hands and cigars until I really knew pretty much
the various attitudes I could get out of the hands. And so you notice I don't start with the cigar. That's the last thing. But his fingers will always do something like that. Always. I mean, never this kind of thing. He thought this was very elegant.
That shows you how low Honest John will stoop. Hey, Giddy?
Disney's animated films were not scripted. Stories and ideas were developed at story meetings where the action was shown in sequences drawn on storyboards. Walt's instructions and suggestions to his animators were very precise, but ultimately he relied on their skills not just as artists, but as actors who brought the characters to life through their drawings.
Pinocchio, why didn't you go to school?
School?
Here he's kind of innocently looking for some way out of this, and I tried to pick little movements and gestures and bits of acting that showed how he felt, that he's caught in a trap, really. And so he looks over at the side kind of looking for help, and of course there's none there for him. He has to face this thing himself. I decided to pick some little thing like a little kid would do to show his embarrassment of being caught in this predicament. So I had him twisting his pants leg.
I was going to school.
A piece of acting that seemed to fit at this point. I always think basically of the emotion and then fit the action to it. In other words, I have to think, how would this guy act if he's terrified? Sometimes I act it out myself in the room, or sometimes I just act it out in my mind, not necessarily with a mirror, but just feel this situation, and then I try to make these drawings. And as I make them, I'm pushing and working my body because I feel it all through my body. And I feel this terror myself.
What's going on? Oh, I've been double-crossed! Help! Help! Somebody help! I've been framed! Help! Please, you gotta help me! Be a pal! Call it!
Pinocchio is actually terrified here not only of Lampwick, but I think of what he thinks might be happening to himself. And this with the face all tightened up. And here, you know, I've used extra lines here that actually make him look older because I think it helped the terrified feeling. And he's backed away from the guy with his shoulders up. He's like he's trying to push himself up the wall and get completely away from him, particularly as he sees these hands change into hooves.
A good example of the difficulties posed for the animators by a seemingly simple piece of action is the scene in which Pinocchio is placed inside a cage in a moving wagon.
They had this little perch inside the cage which was swinging different than the cage itself was going around. And they'd done a very interesting thing there. They built a cage, actually built one, a model of it only about so high. And we needed a cage, you know, actually a larger one. They built it about half size of actual twigs so that it had the real look of the cage and it had the perch in it and everything. Then they photographed that swinging and bouncing the way it would as the wagon went along.
No, wait! Let me out! I'll tell my father!
Peter! Get along, baby.
Well, that saved the time of somebody having to animate that cage, which would have been an enormous job to get all those things in perspective, turning around, and get it accurate. But by having it already on film, then all I had to do was trace it off. Well, somebody else traced it off. They gave me all these drawings of the cage bouncing around and said, okay, now put Pinocchio inside. And I said, whereabouts does he go inside? You know, because he's sitting here and the cage swings like this. Well, how do you draw him this way? And as he starts to get up and reach for something, the floor drops out from under him. You have to have him match that perspective.
Oh, Johnny! Oh, Johnny, where are you?
Well, I think it's your relationship with the character that keeps you going through a scene like that. Because if I had had Goofy in the cage, if I'd had Donald Duck in the cage, or anybody else, they would have acted differently. But I felt so strongly, poor Pinocchio, you know, it wasn't his fault he got thrown in there. And he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know how to deal with this thing. And just sheer panic. He's a little kid.
I shouldn't have walked out on you.
Guess I'll never see my father again.
Oh, buck up, son.
The care lavished on Pinocchio soon sent the film way over budget. Originally budgeted at $500,000, it eventually cost $2.5 million. Everyone at the studio wanted to surpass the achievement of Snow White, but Walt stopped production when he realized that the film still lacked an appealing central character. The answer lay in one of the book's very minor figures, a cricket.
We were dealing with a unique situation with the cricket. He was an insect. He wasn't an animal where all the cubs are cute and you cuddle them, little baby birds in a nest. It was an insect. So when I took my first view of a cricket out of a picture book and under a microscope, I was horrified. I said, this is a cricket? This has to carry the picture? All one colored with all these spikes and hairy things sticking out of all these appendages? And I said, well, let's see. We could do what we do on a lot of characters. We can humanize them. And so I tried a cricket. If you trained him to stand up, for instance, he would look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4 arms and elbows, 2 legs. He still was repulsive. And then I decided to look at the old grasshopper and the ant picture that we had done a few years before. And I noticed that they stuck pretty close to a caricature of a grasshopper. They had the spikes on the legs. And they had this long appendage that comes down the back end of his body, and of course his feathers turned out to be coattail, but that was a character you could live with. So I took the grasshopper as sort of a foundation, and I made my first drawing of the cricket. He wasn't as tall, but he still had those funny legs that attached to the body and had the little pile of tires for a stomach, and the sawtooth legs, and we added the umbrella. And bear in mind, every time I would draw a version where I'd show it to the other animators, they said, well, I think it needs more of this. Oh, I think it needs more of this. I'd never gone through that before. And they said, well, Walt likes this, or Walt likes that. And so I decided, well, let's eliminate the sawtooth legs, and let's make him a little shorter, and don't try to get that funny nose that the grasshopper has. And that's when I decided that from these, I will make him to look much the way he looked in the picture at that stage of the character development.
Arise, Sir Jiminy Cricket. Where?
But you know, he's a cricket because we call him a cricket.
Say, that's pretty swell.
So I started the real cricket and ended up with what we call Jiminy Cricket.
All of that kind of detail, which takes perhaps 30, 40 seconds on screen, costs the Disney studio a fortune to animate, and yet, of course, gives the feeling, evokes all kinds of emotions in order for you to then be able to relate to the story of Pinocchio at the moment that we meet him a few minutes later, setting out on his way to school.
The work of the animators was more than matched by those responsible for the film's look. These included art director Ken O'Connor.
While the audience is following the action of the story and the characters, the atmosphere is being enhanced by little images like this, which are based on a lot of research into Italian architectural doings as to steeples and roofs and so forth, and they give depth and flavor to the picture, while we're really concerned with the action in the foreground. And in the foreground, we had to research out how they capped the walls and how the plaster broke up with the ancient nature of the architecture. And this being sunny Italy, we deliberately painted in strong reflected light, which suggests that it's kicking back off the surface. Here we're working for a dark background behind the character because he's light. And the same thing here, which brings him out. And then when you pan, of course, you have to go out in the light. Here we switched angle violently into a down shot, and we're both panning and rotating the camera. Here they go around the tree, painted on the background. Had they just gone behind the tree, this tree could have been put on an upper level, and the cells would go behind it, the characters would go behind it and register to it automatically, and the registration would be perfect. But in view of the fact that they go behind the tree and in front of it, when they go behind, the character has to be cut off for every frame that he goes behind and added to for every frame that he comes out. We're changing the angle, changing the angle here, and bringing in a foreground level, which is the multiplane effect, moving at a different speed from the background and being actually softened, which gives a contrast with the sharper images beyond and creates depth.
The background paintings against which the animated figures were filmed were a vital part of the movie's look. The richness and beauty of these settings gave them a life of their own. These backgrounds were not merely decorative, but were intended to contribute to the drama.
In Pinocchio, I think the character of Geppetto was enhanced without any animation, but just by the house he lived in, the toys that he built, and we were careful not to overplay those, but all in all, it gave Geppetto a workmanlike presence, and you kind of felt warm about him, playful, kind of an interesting character. And I think that's a good part of what backgrounds helped do. This is one that where we thought a kind of a wet street and a very misty mood added drama to this idea of hunting for Pinocchio.
Pinocchio! Pinocchio!
Geppetto was in here with a lantern, and he would be calling out Pinocchio's name. But meanwhile, the wagon went on by, and he lost him. So that once again, it did add a dimension to the story.
Everything is working in that picture. The draftsmanship, the technical aspects of it, the personalities, the story, of course, is the most important. And when all of that is working, you have a masterpiece.
He's gone! Where'd he go? Look out!
Well, when you consider that Steamboat Willie in 1928 was the first animated cartoon with sound, then a few years later, in 1932, they did the first animated cartoon in color. Then, in 1937, the first feature-length animated film, and continually developing the art. Now, when you consider that this was all done in 10 years, a period from black and white rubber hose animation to full Pinocchio animation in a period of 10 years, that's amazing.
Pickles and ice cream. Eat all you can. Be a glutton. Stuff yourself. What'll I do? What'll I do? What an unusual view.
I can stand the sight of worms and look at microscopic germs, but Technicolor pachyderms is really too much for me.
I am not the type to paint when things are odd or things are quaint, but seeing things you know that ain't can certainly give you an awful fright. What a sight!
Chase 'em away! Chase 'em away! I'm afraid. Need your aid. Big elephants on parade.
The name of Walt Disney has always been associated with animals, and not just the cartoon variety.
In the early 50s, he began producing his nature documentaries, The True Life Adventures. He made live-action films, again using classic stories such as Robin Hood, Rob Roy, and Treasure Island.
Walt Disney marked a new era in motion picture entertainment with his exciting live-action feature, Treasure Island.
Walt was particularly shrewd in his attitude to television. Unlike most Hollywood producers, he didn't see the small screen as a threat.
Through television, he was able to develop a lot of ideas and a lot of cultural things. To me, the best example is always, Davy Crockett, because I always say to everybody, well, boy, how many Davy Crockett's were made, because it's like on everybody's lips as this giant project. And the fact is, there were only 5 hours made of Davy Crockett, and yet most people, when you ask them, say, oh, there must have been 100, or there was, 75, because everybody was wearing a coonskin cap, and, it changed society a little bit, culture changed. And it was from how important television was at the time. He understood that, and he understood how you could really motivate people very quickly through this medium of television. He took advantage of it, and he took advantage of it to, he was the first one to shut almost everything in color, even before there was color television, because he knew the longevity of the product would be worth more when it was able to be cycled through, and he was just very, very, very aggressive towards television.
Derby Foods, makers of creamy and smooth-spreading Peter Pan peanut butter, present Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star.
Disney used television to sell another new and very different project.
I guess you all know this little fella here. It's an old partnership. Mickey and I started out the first time many, many years ago. We've had a lot of our dreams come true. Now we want you to share with us our latest and greatest dreams.
Disneyland, which opened in 1955, was the first theme park. Walt pushed the project through against the wishes of his associates, who were convinced it would fail. In fact, it was another instant success, attracting 1 million visitors in its first 7 weeks. It transformed both the Disney company and its relationship with its audience.
What the theme parks allowed the company to do was make these characters permanently accessible to the population and to children. To meet Mickey Mouse made an indelible impression on children. So I think it was really the theme park that kind of locked the Disney characters into the imaginative life and the popular imagination of the United States. And at the same time, what that did was elevate the Disney studio from simply being just one of a number of companies grinding out animated movies into this cultural institution.
Disney's domination of middle American culture increased with the follow-up to Disneyland, Disney World in Florida. This included the Epcot Center, which Walt intended as a prototype city of the future. This was his last great dream. In 1966, before it was completed, he died of cancer at the age of 65. Epcot, although a hugely successful tourist attraction, never became the experiment in urban design that he had planned. Disney's death left those in charge of the studio with a difficult task: how to run Walt Disney without Walt Disney. His successors shared his conservative moral sense, but lacked his creative imagination.
The real heartbeat of this company was, is, and will always be the film business. Because from the film business comes the ideas that then generate new things in the parks, new promotions, a kind of a sense of continuing newness about the company in general. And when that began to fail, and I actually, somewhere along the line, began hearing things like, well, they don't think they really want to stay in the movie business because it's not doing very well and we don't really even need it anyway. And that gave me all sorts of problems because I remember saying at one point, well, if you really think that way, then what you're doing is running a museum.
The solution to the company's problems lay in new management, headed by Michael Eisner.
Anyway, it's time to get on with the show, right, Mickey?
You said it, boss.
At Paramount, Eisner had been responsible for a string of blockbuster films, from Saturday Night Fever through Raiders of the Lost Ark to Beverly Hills Cop. It was exactly these kinds of films aimed at the young adult market, which he was now able to produce with equal success at Disney under the Touchstone label.
Touchstone Pictures presents Robin Williams as Airman.
My theory was, and maybe still is, that you couldn't do Disney films unless you did Touchstone films. Walt Disney's not here anymore, and I'm not Walt Disney, and none of our executives are Walt Disney. We need other people. We need the new young director that's coming out of the University of Texas or CalArts or somewhere in Europe. We need that guy. We need the Steven Spielbergs, established people, the George Lucases. They're not going to work at this company if they think we are in the dark ages. Now that we are dealing with all of these people in Touchstone, they're saying, well, this is a contemporary company. Maybe now I should give something back. Maybe I'll do a Disney film.
Touchstone Pictures presents The Color of Money.
People don't go see Paramount movies. They don't go see Universal movies. They don't go see Warner Brother movies. They see movies that are about ideas with actors and actresses in it that are of interest to them. They do go see Disney movies. So that really is kind of, I think, unique onto this place. In terms of being able to play in in the larger field, we created this franchise under Touchstone, and are making films for adults. We are making films that are more sophisticated, and do not have to really fulfill the same criteria that a Disney film. So it's allowed us freedom, frankly, to be in all aspects of the business.
FBI special expert Warren Stanton is up against a killer unlike any he's ever faced. A killer no one has ever seen.
Disney has now become a serious rival to the big Hollywood studios. In the first quarter of 1988, Disney films accounted for an extraordinary 30% of the total U.S. box office.
That's a baby.
It's a baby.
Of course it's a baby. It's your baby.
The company's real legacy, however, remains its animation, and it's now attempting to fulfill Walt's dream of producing one animated feature a year. The latest film is Oliver, a modern version of Oliver Twist.
Hey, you got something to say to me, fat boy?
Come on, man. You guys don't scare me. Come on, I'll kill your boys, man. Come on, let me at him. I'll kill him. Come on.
You go ahead.
Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
Like you, old man?
Hey, Roscoe. Is this us losing our sense of humor?
The film's setting and much of its action lends itself to the use of computer animation, as in this sequence where a character descends a spiral staircase.
I'm going to transfer this information over to the computer. So eventually we get the whole image into the computer. It's taking this information and it's giving us the advantage of seeing it from any angle. So it gives us a real degree of creativity.
Animation was an area which initially gave the new management problems due to the fact that the films were storyboarded rather than scripted.
I couldn't follow it. I'd go down there and they go through the storyboards, and you go through one storyboard and then they bring in another storyboard and you'd sit there for hours, and I couldn't remember what was in the first storyboard, and it was a very hard process for me to deal with. I've been used to dealing in the script area. And I was a little critical of some of our animated films that have been done since Walt died, because I thought they were great scenes, but a lot of scenes put together, but sometimes the arc of the story didn't follow the way I was used to thinking about stories, or what I learned in school about the construction of the stories and all that. And I kept thinking about this, and every time I say, how was it done in the past, and I'd hear about Walt, he'd sit there and he'd jump up and down and he'd go back between things and so forth. And then Roy Disney told me a story about how he sat on his bed when he had the flu or the mumps or something and told the entire story of Pinocchio in the bed. And I finally discovered that they did have a script, and the script was in Walt Disney's head. We didn't have Walt Disney. And therefore, we didn't have a single mind tracking the entire movie. We had committee of minds, and that was the problem. And now we do scripts.
He really was the equivalent of a screenplay. I do not do that. I do not have that skill. I do not have that ability. And so what I have done is adapted to what is something I'm comfortable with, which is working with writers, finding an idea, which I feel comfortable about, working with writers, again, causing them to create a great blueprint, then putting it in the hands of an animation staff and letting them adapt that to their art form.
The most spectacular example of new animation is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, co-produced by Touchstone and Steven Spielberg. 5 animated characters brings us back 60 years to Disney's Alice series, but its technical achievement is unmatched.
Get out of that chair!
That's my brother's chair.
Yeah, where is your brother anyway? He looks like a sensitive and sober fellow.
We did 3 things that had never been done before. And the first was, we moved the camera. And that meant we all had to draw little rabbits all turning in perspective, getting bigger or smaller, all in relation to those camera moves. And we had to draw every frame of the film. And that made it much harder and took twice as much money, twice as much time. But it gets the illusion, so it's worth it.
Ouch! We're supposed to be hiding. What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? You're the only person in the theater that isn't laughing. Is there nothing that can permeate your impervious puss?
And then the second thing we did was we found a way to light the characters, make them three-dimensional, or appear 2.5-dimensional at least, and with shadows and rim lighting and stuff. Then the third thing we did, and I think that's the most important thing, is we interacted the live-action characters with the cartoon, and the cartoons with their environment. So the rabbit would be pushing things or hitting things, and they're tangled up together like Laurel and Hardy.
Any valiant? You're under arrest.
When things were working right, Disney would work on the back of envelopes, and he knew all these vaudeville devices of wires and tricks and all. He knew, he was like an engineer, vaudevillian engineer. And apparently he did Dick Humer, who wrote Dumbo, told me he was the same with the water, the irrigation system at Disneyland. Disney worked, the engineers couldn't get it right, and Walt worked it out. Said, you tilt it this way, and you put the... Anyway, he did all that, and when Ed Wynn, they were flying up in the air, in Mary Poppins, and he said that the trick, Disney said, is you change the act shot to shot. You change the device. So the audience, you do it, people are you're just shooting them, they're standing on the ground for one shot, and then everything's upside down for another. You turn the camera upside. Change the trick shot to shot so that the audience can't get on to how you're doing it. In the car chase, the van doors open, and of course we draw a cartoon car that leaps into the road, and the rabbit and Eddie go to get into the car. Then the next shot, they get into the car, but then the next shot we had a little they built an amazing little black car with a little black racing driver, tiny as they could, like a jockey, hunched over the back, and he was hunched up. And then Hoskins would get into this car, and then we'd just animate a rabbit getting into the car, and we'd animate a car over top of the car. That was easy. But then the next shot, we'd pull. The car would stretch out. You see, I mean, not rubber, but I mean, it had a section in the middle which pulled it out. So the car would come apart, and then we'd draw over that. Looked like the car was elastic. And then the next shot, we wouldn't have a car. We'd have Hoskins would be drawn. Well, you wouldn't notice it was going so fast. We'd have a fast shot, and we'd just animate a car without pure animation. Then the next shot, we'd be back to drawing over the real car. So we changed the trick so the audience can't get onto it, not without looking at the frames. Your mind starts to cross over, and that's from Disney. But the whole medium is from Disney. The whole thing is from Disney.
What started out as one man's dream to produce better animated films has grown into a global franchise influencing generations, and it's likely to continue capturing the hearts and the imagination of children for years to come.
It is scary, in a way, the strength of the Disney franchise. Thank God it's toward good, not toward evil, because that kind of power is awesome. It's not my power, it's Mickey Mouse's power. I know that sounds silly, but I've seen it everywhere. I think maybe it's prenatal. I don't know, these kids, they're 3 months old, their mother's carrying the baby, and they see Mickey Mouse, and the eyes pop open, and the smile comes. I don't know, maybe it's like a drug.